Hello there guys, what is going on? SonOfChelsea back here again for the first episode of the Every Other Saturday podcast in 2021. Hope you're doing well and keeping safe. A bit like last year, I love to get people on the channel speaking about Chelsea, and hopefully going to be doing this a lot more regularly this year on the channel with some amazing Chelsea guests, returning ones like today I've had before, hopefully a lot more regularly on the channel, discussing recent Chelsea events and news and having great discussions, but probably some new ones on the channel too. Also, you can listen to this as a full audio podcast as well, link in the description box if you are watching this on YouTube. But as I said, a returning guest on the channel, a great guest I had last time. It's a bit frustrating that the last time we spoke was sort of a down moment for the club. We just lost to Spurs, but we had a great conversation then, and I think we're going to have a great conversation now, and hopefully this guest will be featuring a lot on the channel this year, speaking about Chelsea. Great to welcome back Jai Mcintosh, the co-owner of the Chelsea Social and the Chelsea FC Women's Social. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, man, I'm good. Thank you for having me back. It's always a privilege. Yeah, you're right. It's a bit of a shame we seem to be chatting in down times, but I think it's good that you and I can have a discussion, hopefully come out with something a bit more constructive than what we tend to see on social media primarily. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's to me as a fan, it feels a bit like Groundhog Day. I don't know if you feel the same in terms of, not maybe to the same extent because there aren't fans in the stadium to gauge this, and I think that's a problem. But it feels at the moment we're sort of heading back into the Sarri days in a sense of people being quite divided about the manager situation. Someone, of course, is part of creating a website and writing about Chelsea, and obviously that very involved in social media on Twitter, and of course you're on it a lot and give your opinions. What's sort of your take on the way things are at the moment? Because it does feel quite toxic, and it's quite a representation of where we are in terms of the way people debate things generally, but it's not a nice place, is it, at times?
No, it's not. I mean, in terms of the debate stuff, there's no I rarely see constructive debate in terms of considering people's opinions or people giving considerate opinions in the first place. Secondly, the sort of short-termism that seems to be a part of a majority of Chelsea fans' psyche in the way they think about football is beginning to show. And it seems as though the pretense that was giving Lampard an extended period of time to try and work out what's going to go on is now not happening, and people don't believe in that anymore, which is, in my opinion, that's a shame. And then obviously social media polarizes pretty much every issue you can get, so it's no surprise that it's going this way. I do think it's interesting that obviously you mentioned Sarri just now. People are frustrated with Sarri because he was so rigid in his principles, and now a lot of the debate around Lampard is that what are his principles, what is his style, what is he trying to do? So it seems as though you can't actually win. If you stick to your principles enough, you get slated, and if you seem to chop and change too much, you get abuse as well from the fans. And finally, I think, I've commented on it, and I don't want to seem anyway like I'm virtue signaling to some extent, but some of the comments from Chelsea fans specifically about players and about Lampard and sort of the abuse that he's received is I just don't understand why would you do that? And also, why would players from other clubs that have social media and know what goes on, why would they want to come to such a great club like Chelsea when the fans treat you this way? We're very quick to dish it out to Arsenal fans or to Real Madrid fans for when they jump on their players, but when we do it to just the same extent, and I think that's really disheartening, especially at the moment.
I feel like this is more of a general thing because I see the way other fans speak about their clubs, like rival clubs, just generally. And I think what you find is that a lot of fan bases think and at least talk in similar ways to you as a fan, in terms of, I'm not saying that every fan base, of course, is the same and cares about the same things, but unfortunately, this is a general problem in football in terms of the way we speak about players and managers and the abuse you see on social media. I mean, it always has puzzled me, and I think that's what's annoyed me recently is accounts that I respect or follow their opinions, and I see excuses made for abuse. There's a clear defined line between giving criticism to Frank Lampard about the formation, the tactics, the lineup, and saying this is what I feel he's getting wrong at the moment. So just like there is a clear line there, and I don't know why there's constant buts and trying to make excuses and trying to sort of justify this. And the worst one I just have no time for is the idea that because these people in football are paid so highly, you can just treat them abhorrently and get away with it, and you feel morally justified for doing so. I mean, does that frustrate you as well? Because it certainly does to me, because I'm like, I don't understand why people feel they have to go that extra step constantly when we're speaking about a sport.
Yeah, it makes no sense to me that someone can suffer such abuse just because they happen to earn more than most of the people that give out the abuse. It makes no difference how much someone earns in terms of the way you treat someone. It should make absolutely no difference, because at the end of the day, especially in terms of footballers that play for the club that you support, they are representatives of a dream that you believe in, and they're trying to do their job. It's not actually that easy, funnily enough, because every other club is working in elite ways and doing things, slightly differently, and they're all trying to achieve the same thing. So there's, the competition is extremely high. So your abuse towards someone and is really not very helpful. When you justify it through earnings or how much they earn, it's just void, in my opinion. I don't take that argument seriously whatsoever, and I don't think reasonable people do that at all. But it's a shame, because things like price tags, they do come with sort of extra baggage. And I understand that to the extent where, if you pay 80 million for someone like Kai Havertz, you can understand why fans would expect them to perform. But that seems as though that's their only reasoning for him needing to perform, without taking into account COVID, change of language, change of scenery. He's younger than me, he's younger than you. He's adapting to a new way of life. If what I think about is, if I got picked up and placed somewhere else, and then with this massive baggage of how much I cost to bring there, and then I took a little bit of time to adapt, and the amount of abuse that I then subsequently received, I wouldn't find that fair or justified at all. So that's kind of my way of thinking. And I think if you're bringing someone's wages into it because that's a fair criticism, it isn't, because they, more often than not, the clubs offer those wages. And so,
well, and also fans demand big signings and big players. You're speaking about sort of the short-term mentality, and it's something I've been speaking about recently on the channel in regards to Lampard. And for me, it's that sort of contradiction and hypocrisy of constantly demanding the club spends lots and lots of money on massive players. No one was complaining over the summer when we were spending all this money on big players and trying to improve the squad. But then the moment those players start struggling, you start complaining about that and stating that, or trying to go for the opposite, maybe moaning about young players not given a chance. I think you can't have it both ways. And unfortunately, I think I see a lot of times where people want things both ways. They want to see young players promoted. They want to see new signings come in. They want to have trophies instantly, but they want to have a long-term project. There are, I think, especially for Chelsea now, where we stand with Lampard, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit more, it does feel like a stick or twist thing for me in terms of not just the short-term direction, but the long-term direction of where Chelsea are going to go. Of course, recent results over the festive period have been awful. 4 defeats in 6. The last one, Man City, 3-0. I mean, your general impressions on the game, because it did feel, although City, and I think I didn't stress this enough in my review, City did play some wonderful football, and they've got some incredible players. I felt Phil Foden was incredible. Kevin De Bruyne, obviously, world class. I still think he's the best player in the Premier League. I know there are other players maybe in better consistent form. But it just felt like deja vu to Arsenal, where the game's done at half time. It did feel quite shambolic and chaotic, and a new low point under Lampard. What were your sort of takes on that game? Because it was a bad afternoon for Chelsea.
Yeah, it was a bad afternoon. I think, it's quite prescient actually that we're talking about short-termism in football, because it seems as though people have quickly forgotten that Pep Guardiola is the world's best manager, and City, give or take, have the world's best squad. So it's not always that easy. You are right. De Bruyne is, in my opinion, as well, the best player in the Premier League when everyone's firing. I think he's technically the most gifted. But yeah, tactically outdone. I mean, Pep seems to do that to a lot of managers, so I'm not particularly surprised. I think player performance is something that needs to be focused on as well. I was not particularly impressed with anyone on the pitch, I can't lie. Hudson-Odoi, in fairness to him, and I've said this on a couple of podcasts now, I've been very critical of him over the last year, and I'm happy to eat my words after a few of his decent performances and nice cameos. Hopefully he gets a longer run in the squad. But to be honest with you, I don't really know how much I can take away from the fact that, you know, if you pay 80 million for someone like Kai Havertz, you can understand why fans would expect him to perform. But that seems as though people have quickly forgotten that Pep Guardiola is the world's best manager, and City, give or take, have the world's best squad. So it's not always that easy. You are right. De Bruyne is, in my opinion, as well, the best player in the Premier League when everyone's firing. I think he's technically the most gifted. But yeah, tactically outdone. I mean, Pep seems to do that to a lot of managers, so I'm not particularly surprised. we are not as good as people thought. We come away from 17 games unbeaten, quite a few draws. The win against Sevilla was great, but apart from that, I do think we should be beating those teams regardless. And therefore, when we play against better teams or teams that are resilient or stronger or that have a plan B or a plan C, I think that's when we get stuck in the mud, to be honest with you. And I mentioned speaking to Matisse recently on his channel with Lawrence Viscoli, how I feel slightly disappointed in the fact that some of the players don't seem to impose their status on the opposition team, whereas in previous Chelsea sides, I think, you and I have a shared love for Diego Costa. Everyone does not want to play against Diego Costa. But even if he's not going to score, he's going to cause you absolute hell for an hour and a half. And we have players that can do that to opposition teams, yet they don't seem to have it in their mentality, perhaps, to want to impose themselves in that way. And I'd love to see a bit more of that, to be honest, because I'm not really too disheartened about losing to City as a general principle, because I think City are a far better team that are tactically greater and coached to a much higher degree. So I understand that, and I do think their squad's far superior to ours. Not far superior maybe, but it's better. Even if they do things slightly differently in terms of not playing a recognised striker, which I think maybe threw the Chelsea squad and management a bit. But personally, I think if you're playing a Pep team, you have to expect the unexpected almost. Even anyone who plays a fantasy Premier League game knows that you don't really put City players in because 1 week they're starting, 1 week they're not. You never know how things are going to work. So you have to anticipate that. But also, there was a lack of cutting edge from the Chelsea side. And I've said this all season. We need to harness direct attacking football. And we would be so effective if that were the case, if we could transition the ball quickly and catch teams out. And we've spoken about this previously, that it's a sort of a club cultural thing for Chelsea, in my opinion, that we've been the most successful under direction and management that has allowed the club to play, in my opinion, what kind of Chelsea football is, which is fast counter-attacking football. I think that's something the fans appreciate more so than possession football. And we just don't seem to be doing that. And that for me is frustrating. And it doesn't help when, a decent majority of players are not hitting or not in good patches of form either. So it just seems that everything that could go wrong is going wrong at the moment. But I do think some perspective's needed on the fact that when you lose to Man City, it's not always the worst thing ever. It's just happened to be the nature of the performance more so than the actual result, I think.
Well, and also, if we'd gone through a decent run of results up to then, say, the Wolves defeat hadn't happened, the Everton defeat, especially the Arsenal defeat hadn't happened, all of those things didn't happen before City, and then we lost 3-0 to City. Sure, it'd be a bad day, but I think it's the fact that there was a lot of people looking at that performance and the pressure going into it, the frustration with recent results, and then sort of feeling that, even though it is City and they are playing very well, this feels like an Arsenal performance again, in terms of tactically, in terms of players being out of position. And I am conflicted about that, because in one sense, when you talk about sort of the more, I guess you call it reactive counter-attacking football, I feel that if you were to talk about a Chelsea way, because I've always been of the belief that, unfortunately, I think, or right or wrongly, Chelsea don't really have a style of play that, fans will go into and say, this is the way we play. Sometimes, yeah, because I was having this conversation with Nini recently, and we were talking about the two of the best Chelsea title-winning teams, the 04-05 team versus the 09-10 team. Very different in terms of style. One team was all into attacking play and all into scoring bundles of goals. They broke records that season, whilst Jose's team broke defensive records, that still probably won't be broken for a very long time based on the nature of defending nowadays. So I think that's difficult. And to me, I don't know if you agree, I feel that we're in sort of an identity crisis, and I feel we have been since Conte left, I feel, because I feel once we brought in Sarri, there was this belief that, okay, we're going to start to transition Chelsea from a counter-attacking team into a possession-based one. There are still players from the Sarri year within the team that Lampard still regularly uses. And I feel the issue with trying to go back to that style of play, say Conte and before them, is I don't feel we have enough players that do that. I feel we've assembled a squad under Lampard that is trying to play a much more progressive style of play. And that's maybe where the issue and friction is, isn't it? Because if you believe that's the style that actually probably will work for Chelsea, but you've got a coach and you've got a load of players who want to play more attacking play, I think that's where maybe we need more patience, or that you're going to have bad days like the other day.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it seems to be an unpopular opinion, but I'm a massive Conte fan. I love the way Antonio Conte works, to be honest with you. I think that his way of doing things, even though it ended on a very sour note, I think Chelsea fans bought into it very quickly, because he can almost guarantee instant success wherever he goes due to the way that he manages. But you are right in terms of, the phrase identity crisis is an interesting one, because, you are right. We've not really had an identity, and the problem is we buy players to suit a manager, but we haven't had a manager since '03 that stayed for longer than 3 years. So the team is constantly transitioning and turning over, and that has been a successful model. But into the 2020s, how successful is that going to be now? You just don't know. I mean, I look at clubs like Arsenal or Barcelona, and I'm sure people won't be too pleased for me speaking about Arsenal in this way, but for me, when I think about which club in the Premier League has historically the most identifiable way of playing, I always think of Arsenal. I can tell you how Wenger wanted to play football. I can tell you players that would fit an Arsenal style of football. Same with Barcelona. They buy players that fit their mould of football, not the manager that's there. And they expect people to adhere to the principles of football that govern the club. And at Chelsea, we don't have that. So to me, it's how can you expect fans on the one hand and then players and management on the other to try and quickly install a set of principles that are going to increase the club's success long term, because we just don't allow that to happen. So if you're a Chelsea fan and that's what's exercising you, I understand the frustration, but it's also, if you're not willing, for example, now to give Lampard the time to see what he can do, then that just continues the process on to the next manager. And it's going to be, give or take, 20 years now that we haven't had an identifiable way of playing football that's lasted longer than 2 seasons. So I raised this question with Matisse and Lawrence, like, would you rather have a manager with principles, but that takes 2 to 3 seasons before we win anything, or would you rather a manager that comes in, instant success, but then maybe doesn't install a way of playing and then leaves again? Because personally, I think that the majority of Chelsea fans would rather that. I think they would rather the short-term success over the long-term gains, to be honest with you, because that's kind of what Chelsea fans have been brought up to expect. So I can't be angry at them. I can't expect anything different. If you're raised a certain way, almost, it's how you're going to be. But to me, that's not what I think of football. I've been fortunate enough, and so have you and I are the same age, to really witness Chelsea in their full glory, I guess, and their full pomp. And I personally would be willing to not win something for a few seasons if it meant that we could work out a long-term plan. But it's hard because the majority of the fan base aren't used to that, and that's not their fault. And then inherently they're not willing to give that time because they expect results, right? So it's a tough one.
Well, and also my concern is about the short-term sort of philosophy is I don't think it's as effective, because there are better clubs at the top of the Premier League now competing for 6 spots, 4 spots now, and there's 6 teams usually. And you see the likes of Southampton and especially Leicester. I worry about Leicester because I think their ability to sell players like Ben Chilwell, like N'Golo Kante, like Riyad Mahrez, and reinvest on really good talent. And this is 2 seasons in a row now they're competing for Champions League spots. I mean, this is not a fluke. It's not like the Premier League winning season. There's harmony at that club now. There seems to be that they're going to stick behind Brendan Rodgers, and they're coping well, and they've got a style of play that works for them. So there could even be more than 6 teams that could compete for the league. And when you've got coaches of the quality of Hasenhüttl at Southampton, if he stays there for a while, you think that team's going to be quite strong. That's going to be tricky. So it's very hard compared to 10 years ago. This is the point I made recently, was that I think people are still lured into the belief that we can sack a manager mid-season, you bring in a new one, whoever that is, and something will be salvaged. We'll win a Premier League, or we'll win a Champions League, we'll win an FA Cup. and without sort of understanding the quality that squad had, in terms of, it was just absolutely ridiculous. I still think people underestimate how good those Chelsea teams were in like the 05-010 season. Even as recently now, in the last decade of 12-13, that was the last time we sacked a manager mid-season, and it actually ended in silverware at the end of that season with Rafael Benitez. So I think that's a difficulty, and I just don't think the short-term system works, because I see Liverpool and Man City, and I feel that, sure, a lot can change in football, and the likes of Pep and Klopp could leave and things could really go downhill for those two clubs, and then a lot of stability could go out the window with those two managers leaving. Massive characters, and like that, do you think football works in sort of cycles? Currently we're in sort of a trend of more wanting progressive football. It could swing back the other direction where we want more counter-attacking football, and that's working again. So it's very difficult for me to sit here and tell you what's actually going to work, especially when I feel that a bit like what Sarri came up against, and I think what Lampard's coming up against now, is it's a culture clash. It's looking to steer the club away from what it's been used to. And to me, I worry about when people bring up Tuchel, Nagelsmann, any other coach. I'm like, why are they not going to run into the same issues, and why are they not going to have the same friction when they arrive?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, those names that you mentioned as well, like, I got branded a hipster football person the other day because I really, really back Jesse March as a coach at Salzburg. I think he's an outstanding manager, and I love the way he does things. But I can throw the names Jesse March, Marco Rosa, Nagelsmann, Tuchel, any of these guys. I can throw them at you, and you know what? Great. Look at the way they play. It's outstanding. They get great results out of big teams, and they know how to coach, good players and bring through youth. But 18 months down the line, they're going to run into the same wall that is always there. They are going to run into it, and it's actually quite tedious because it's so predictable. And I feel like we're maybe one of the only clubs in European football that this happens to. I genuinely struggle to think of other clubs where this consistently happens. And, when you bring up Leicester, for example, I love what Leicester are doing. They're doing it in exactly the right way. And there seems to be complete cohesion there between fans, management and players about what's going on. And, I actually spoke on Never a Foul podcast. There's some great guys on YouTube. And I mentioned that I felt personally one of the issues that I'm having at the moment is that with the new signings that we brought in, with the players that we brought in, I think, firstly, they're outstanding. But secondly, it feels as though some of the ties between the youth team and the first team have been severed to prioritise these big signings. And I understand that. But I personally felt last season that one of the most significant cultural changes that we've all wanted for years and years is in establishing the youth talent in the first team. That was massive for us. That was huge. And that's something that you can't measure by statistics, that feeling of that motivation that when the players are looking at each other, you can see Reece and Tammy looking at each other thinking, look where we are. We've got here. This matters so much to those players. And you can't actually buy that feeling, unfortunately. It's really, really rare for players to be bought in and then to completely adopt the mentality of the club. And, even I live in Liverpool. You look at Salah or Mane, they do bits in the community. They're loved, but they don't have the mentality of the club. That mentality is subsumed by Klopp because of the way he is.
Oh, and also Trent Alexander-Arnold. I look at Trent Alexander-Arnold.
Curtis Jones, Henderson. I mean, the list goes on there. And we have those players now. But I'm looking at the youth team thinking, God, we got some of the best young players in world football. And I'm fairly sure they don't see a path to the first team anymore. And it's been one season. I said, and it may have been a reactionary thing to say, but I said, after the City result, I would send the entire first team squad to go and watch the youth team play. Because they know exactly what it means and exactly what they want, and they want to play for Chelsea.
And there's serious players down there at the academy now.
They're unreal.
When you watch them come up to the first team, I think there's been such a mentality shift there because of Lampard, right? When Lampard leaves, I think the long-lasting thing he'll have, right? And he may not have a trophy, he may not have instilled the most clear style of play or whatever. But I think what he will have, and I hope this is long-lasting because I think it has to be, is giving young players a chance, bringing young players into the first team, saving the club millions of pounds in transfer fees. We spent a lot last summer, but we've probably saved as much in bringing up Mason Mount and him being a key player in the first team, Reece James, Tammy Abraham, Billy Gilmore. I see the likes of Tino Andrin coming in the Champions League, and all right, it's a bit of a dead rubber game, but these are serious players now, and I have no doubt if some of them feature, like Livramento, they feature, and I'm sure we'll talk about Morecambe a little bit later when they come into the team, hopefully when Frank rotates it a bit, that these players are serious now. They're not rabbit in headlights because they're not just happy to be there. These are serious athletes, and I'm not saying that the likes of Josh McEachran in the past weren't. Back then, it was so rare to see a young player come in. I think there was a sense that, well, you're just here for a little bit and then you'll be gone likely. I think now there's a belief that, no, I can actually get a chance in the first team. And I think, I really hope that's what stays beyond Lampard, because I worry if it doesn't. Once again, this is the thing that annoys me. If you're going to call for Lampard's head, but you're also someone that has a go at the club for letting young talent go too early, once again, it's that friction, isn't it? We speak about, Tuchel, I know, has been brought up. I don't know if you said it, because I did watch a little bit of your stream with Matisse. I think you said you referenced Callum Hudson-Odoi in terms of Tuchel and potentially working with him, because I read a book about Tuchel and his work with Dembele, I think it was, at Borussia Dortmund. So, he has got a history of working with young players. And I like that. But once again, you get into this stage of, well, if he works with a certain young player, any coach, but it takes a little bit longer, and I'm going to be a little bit patient with you. I'm not going to play you every single week like Sarri did. Like, I want you to improve this element of your game. And then certain fans get annoyed about that. It's this constant thing that I just believe that fans should decide what they want from Chelsea and then stick to it. I think, and that's an easy thing for me to say, I just think, can we decide what we're doing? Because it feels like Liam Toomey said on the Straight Out Common podcast, I don't think Chelsea fans are going to agree about anything again. And it's a sad statement, but I think it's a very true one.
Yeah, it is a true one. And it's, personally, I think bringing through all these young players that Lampard's done, that's bigger than a trophy, because we've been calling out for it for years, whereas we've been getting trophies every season. He's done something that actually, what other manager has done that for us? I genuinely don't know. And that, to me, that's an outstanding legacy that I hope doesn't get shut off if Lampard leaves. It's tough because I don't think Chelsea fans know what they want, and I think the main crux of the issue is, do you want short-term gains or do you want a long-term plan and you're going to have to suffer for it a bit? I think people want bragging rights, which is embarrassing because we don't need to brag anymore. We've got enough trophies, if that's what you want to talk about. We've got more than most teams have ever had, right? The majority of football teams across the world don't have the amount of significant trophies that Chelsea have. There's nothing to prove. I don't know what we have to prove now. We've established ourselves as an elite club, as a massive club. We've won everything we can win. Maybe now it's time that we think, okay, let's try and conquer a different aspect of football. Let's nail down a club ideology. Let's make sure that there's a clear path from the youth teams to the first team. Let's make sure that, I can't stand the way that Chelsea is marketed towards other players as a lifestyle. I hate it. I don't want you coming to Chelsea because it's a club with a great lifestyle. I want you to come here because you're going to die to win. Genuinely, that's why I like Conte so much. Do you know what I mean? I know people don't agree with that, and that's totally fine. There are lots of benefits to playing for Chelsea, and I understand them. But you come here to play football and to be the best. And if you're going to come here and just collect wages and then put in okay performances, I don't want you here. Just because you're a big signing, there'll be kids in the youth team that can double your output and will do it for give or take nothing. And that's what we need to understand as Chelsea fans, really. And that discussion needs to be had, and it's too difficult because you can't harness all voices at once. Twitter, as we know, is a bit of an echo chamber anyway. But do you want short-term success, or are you willing now to say, right, since 2000 we've been the most successful English club. I'm willing to give it a few seasons and then we'll go again, see what happens, because I think that's got to be the way we go now, personally, because we don't have anything to prove. Liverpool are run unbelievably intelligently. City are outstanding. It'll be interesting to see what happens when Pep leaves. Plus, I think some of City's key players are aging out, so they're going to reach an impasse at some point when Aguero leaves, De Bruyne's 30, Fernandinho's 35. Company's still not properly been replaced, although Diaz is interesting. I like him. Like, there's going to be changes. There's going to be things going on. This league is never... It's not as rigid as it was 10 years ago, where you could tell the top four every single season was going to be United, Chelsea, Arsenal, and whoever else, Man United, Liverpool. Do you know what I mean? So we have to really have the discussion, like you were saying. What is it we want in the short term, and what is it we want in the long term? Short term, are you willing to drop out of a top four if that happens, to maybe solidify your top four position in 2 years' time for the next 10 years? Or is that not good enough and you want a trophy now? And people need to be really honest with what they actually want from the club, because otherwise discourse is just going to continue to be polarised.
Well, and also the board, it comes to the board, doesn't it? Because as it's quite clear financially, as we see with the, and it's quite boring for fans to think about, but the financial results last year and the financial results that have just come out were actually more positive this year than they were last year. But you got to understand how long these financial results are taken over. So in terms of, because football, we don't really judge football over a calendar year, do we? We judge it over a 9-month period. In terms of short-term thinking. And Chelsea need Champions League football if they want to compete as a top club. Now, when we say compete as a top club, what we're referencing, I think, is that big summer spend, and as you've stated, I think it's not only a mentality change with the fans. We can sit here and speak about that and say we want a long-term philosophy, as a fan, because I've been privileged enough to see us win everything. A few years where we're struggling a bit, I can take, right? But if the board doesn't take it and they don't believe that, because they still want to be one of the top four clubs, they want the money that comes in from Champions League football, the financial reality of the situation, that's unfortunately as sort of, what's the right word for it, as poetic as we can be in terms of what we want to see long term from Chelsea and our sort of vision for Chelsea over the next decade. I think that's going to be a friction as well. And I think what we get to is the realism of the current situation, that it looks very likely that Lampard won't be here beyond this season.